Welcome everyone! Today we're going to conquer all nations in Hearts of Iron 4 before the end of 1937. The current version of the game is arguably the best one for a world conquest because of some rather drastic changes to core mechanics. But more on that later. We're playing on Ironman mode and with no mods of course. The specifics of this run are naturally tailored around Japan, but the underlying strategy can be applied to all playthroughs. Anyway, enjoy! The setup for our campaign is similar to my recent Roman Empire run. We go with electronic mechanical engineering as well as paratroopers as our research and begin constructing a couple of military factories in states with high infrastructure in Japan. We then delete most of our production lines. This is going to be an infantry-only campaign more or less, but there is potential for cheap and fast light tanks if you want to experiment a bit. Although airborne assaults are not absolutely required, they still make this run a whole lot easier. That's why we allocate 8 military factories to transport plane production, cancel the oil trade and import aluminum and rubber. Next we send all ships to a single port and delete all air wings. While we do that, let me quickly address the selection of DLCs for this run. I'm using game mechanics from practically all DLCs for this strategy, but have purposefully disabled the most recent one by blood alone. But you don't have to. The strategy works just as well with the DLC enabled, but takes about 100 days longer because of Switzerland's neutrality national spirit. Everything else plays and works identical with or without the Italy DLC. You can actually achieve a faster time with by blood alone enabled and playing as Italy, but I've played Italy so many times now and the original strategy was developed around Japan, so I thought it's more fun to show it off this way. After sorting out the navy, we request forces from our puppets and split up our units into armies. The divisions from our puppets are going to man the borders with the Soviets near Vladivostok and on the Sakhalin Peninsula. As Japan, we start with a bunch of basic infantry and cavalry, some heavy infantry and a couple of tanks and motorized. We put each of those into separate armies, resulting in groups of 40, 15 and 5, with the additional 12 divisions from our puppets. Before we kick off our campaign with a naughty move, we establish an agency and set the occupation laws to no garrison. Only Korean and Chinese states receive special treatment for now and have to live under martial law. In order to achieve the goal of this run, a certain degree of cheese is inevitable. We cannot join the Axis at the start of the game as Japan anymore in version 1.12, so we need a different entry point into Europe. The least complex way is setting up Order 66 on Italy. In preparation for that, we put our armies on garrison orders across the country and ask for military access. There is an alternative way to go about this that doesn't involve Order 66, but it's a bit complicated and not as reliable. We've got a lot to cover already, so I'll keep the alternative ways for a later video. Now that we're done with the setup, we need to get into a war with a major nation as soon as possible to reduce the time it takes to justify additional war goals. This is best achieved by going for the Soviets first. We have a claim on territory that they currently hold and get a base justification reduction from a national spirit, which means we can justify for 21 political power and it will only take 105 days to complete. A couple of days later, after accumulating at least 10 additional political power, we select our first focus. We could do that earlier, but that results in negative political power and holds all ongoing justifications until the value is positive again. We pick Army Expansion Law, which grants us 30 army experience points once it's done. At the end of January, we perform a research swap to get paratroopers a bit sooner and upgrade our agency the next day. I won't comment on agency upgrades and research any further, since there really isn't anything special about it. The second operator slot is what we're after, which we unlock by upgrading the agency 5 times. Most of the upgrades don't serve much of a purpose for this run, so we focus on decryption instead. On March 1st, we can hire an operative and order her to build an intel network in Vladivostok. Army Expansion Law finishes on March 18th and we take Purge the Kodoha next. On March 25th, we hire a chief of the army for 50 political and 30 command power. Main reason we want him is the passive army experience gain that he provides. We select state serves the military on April 19th. War is nearly upon us, but our home islands are currently pretty vulnerable to bombing and naval invasions. That's why we set up a couple of fleets to contest naval supremacy, to sink enemy convoys and protect our own. I didn't put too much thought into the setup of the navy, and I'm sure there's room to optimize. All I cared about was not needing to touch it again for the rest of the game. We don't have many planes to work with, but the few that we do have are going to patrol the skies over Japan, but I should have set them to intercept instead of air superiority. We are now in a comfortable position for a war against the Soviets. The only direct border that we share is tiny and easy to hold, and our fleet protects us from naval invasions. This makes defending against the Soviets extremely cheap for us. Just don't accidentally call Japan's puppets into the war. It's terrible terrain to fight in with even worse supply. The Soviet AI is nevertheless putting divisions on the border, which plays right into our strategy. Lastly, we cancel transport plane production and allocate the military factories to support equipment, artillery and infantry equipment. All additional factories that we get during this run are going to be divided amongst these 3 production lines. We no longer need to trade for aluminum and rubber and instead buy oil from the United States to keep up with the increased consumption once we deploy ships and planes. Our war goal on the Soviet Union is ready 1 week later, and we declare right away. Albania is next on the list. We're now at war with a major nation, which reduces justification time by 80%. Japan's militarism, national spirit provides another 20% reduction. World tension at its current scale also adds another 25%. That means we've already reduced the time needed to justify down to the hard-coded minimum of 10 days. On May 6th, we declare war on Albania and begin a new justification against New Zealand, but any Commonwealth nation would suffice. If we attempt this as any other nation, we'd be at war with the Allies already because the United Kingdom usually guarantees Albania. Japan is an exception to that, and I assume it has to do with preventing the Allies from intervening in Asia. Only Italy is guaranteeing Albania, enabling us to turn our military axis into an easy backstep victory. We paused the game shortly after declaring to delete all garrison orders. This stops our divisions from moving around. We are instead going to manually use them to capture Italy's victory points quickly. The exact placement of the Italian divisions is random each time, although it tends to be easier if Italy has defeated Ethiopia at this point. While we execute Order 66 in the background, let's talk about the idea that's at the heart of this world conquest strategy. At the start of the game, Japan shares the world with exactly 82 nations. And as demonstrated, it takes us 150 days to get justification time down to 10 days. Assuming that we can keep justifying without interruption after that, we reach a total of 820 days. But there are plenty of nations that we do not need to manually justify on. 25 to be exact, assuming Italy takes over both the Sultanate of Ausa and Ethiopia. The other 23 are going to get involved through guarantees, or by being called into the war by their faction members. 2 of them are already our puppets, although we need to annex them as well, and my particular strategy requires 2 justifications against Spain. Long story short, 695 days is all that it takes, at least on paper. Our next casus belli, this time on Yugoslavia, is a good example for that. Once we declare on Yugoslavia, France, Romania and Czechoslovakia are also going to join the war because of their guarantees for Yugoslavia's independence. In my many attempts, Italy usually did not defeat Ethiopia in time, with or without by blood alone. Of course, it's better to have 1 less nation to deal with, so I won't complain, but it has no effect on our strategy, nor is it absolutely required to achieve a sub-38 world conquest. Don't be worried about a possible civil war, Italy hasn't unlocked the balance of power through the focus tree yet. Should Ethiopia still be alive and kicking, you'll have to share the spoils of war with them during the peace conference. They never claim any territory beyond Somalia and Eritrea, so this isn't an issue either. For whatever reason, we are not rewarded with any equipment after annexing Italy, which is quite disappointing. It's always like that with Italy, but not with any other war. Don't ask me why that is, I have no idea. In case you know of a possible explanation, let me know in the comments. Our next justification is against Hungary. I'll get to the reason for that in a second. First, we have to rearrange our armed forces. We select each of the 2 stacks of 20 divisions, detach 8 cavalry units in total, and assign them to an airport closest to the French border. That's also where our transport planes are going to be stationed. The remaining forces are going to cover the land borders. Our heavy infantry, tanks and motorized will also have to move to the border in preparation for the next step. We now wait for paratrooper research to finish and meanwhile continue to justify on various European nations. We currently have no new focus selected, but that's on purpose. There are a couple of reasons why we aim for Hungary, Belgium, the Netherlands and Poland specifically. We'll face the Soviets after the war is over and are going to need lots and lots of equipment fast to field many more divisions, which we can only achieve by capturing additional equipment from enemy stockpiles. We also want to maximize the border lengths with the Soviets. Only fighting them through Romania, for example, would lead to a very short front line. That's why we need to take over Poland as well. The paratrooper research finishes on June 26. We immediately switch our 8 cavalry units into the paratrooper template and let the game run for another 24 hours. Even if no additional equipment is required, it still takes a while before the game accepts their new purpose. If you try to draw drop orders immediately after the template swap, the game would not allow you to assign those units to air assaults. We aim the drops at high-value victory points in France, activate the orders and declare war on New Zealand. You might have noticed that we didn't use any of the war goals that we justified after Albania up until now, and for good reasons. If we declare war, the target nation will join any faction that we're already at war with, unless they have conflicting ideologies. But given the choice, they will join the faction that aligns more with their own ideology. Albania, for example, was not given a choice and joined Comintern. The same would happen for any other non-aligned communist or democratic nation. But after we've started a war with the Allies, non-aligned and democratic nations will opt to join them over the Comintern instead. That's why we declare on New Zealand first, then wait for the Commonwealth to heed the call before declaring on Yugoslavia. This way, France, Yugo and the other Balkan nations are going to join the Allies, which is most crucial for this strategy to work. After France joins the war, our air assault can launch. It's a pretty reliable setup, but it can fail in some rare cases when too many of our paratroopers encounter a division on target. Luckily, that does not happen this time and France surrenders as expected. We move our paratroopers, heavy infantry, tanks and motorized to the northern coast right after and delete and reform our transport air wing. If paradrop orders are cancelled while the mission is still ongoing, or if transport planes have been used for air supply missions, they somehow can get bugged and are unusable for any subsequent mission. We make sure that this isn't the case by reforming the air wing, which I accidentally forgot to do on time here and only realize it once our divisions are in position. Our next justification is against Sweden. We now prepare the drop into the UK. Make sure to aim at port cities first, since this drop is most likely going to get interrupted by the Royal Air Force soon after launching. The reason this double air assault even works is that the AI always sets their plane on the adjacent air zone, but not on the ones we're jumping from. At least not immediately. We send our armies across the channel into different ports and begin the conquest of Britain. But before we take any major victory point, we need to finally use the war goals we've been collecting. Poland is one of the 2 nations from our list that sometimes does not do what we want them to do, which is joining the Allies. Because of their shared border with the Soviets and their non-aligned ideology, there's a chance that Poland joins the Comintern over the Allies. Unfortunately, I haven't found a foolproof way to influence this decision. I think size and strength of an alliance as well as surrender progress plays a role in the evaluation, but I don't know if this is actually true or just based on false conclusions from my previous attempts. Since I believe that it does play a role, I make sure to declare on the other nations first and wait for them to join the Allies before going for Poland. 2 ideas play into the timing here. Right now, the UK is technically far away from surrendering and hasn't lost a majority of their VPs yet. Secondly, waiting until after our troops made landfall also helps to delay any divisions that the old and new members of the Allies might send to the United Kingdom. After declaring war on Poland, we turn our attention towards Scandinavia, starting with Sweden. Finland, because of its non-aligned ideology and proximity to Comintern, is going to be another case of uncertainty. Having Sweden, a nation that Finland shares a border with, in the Allies prior to declaring war in Finland helps to push them towards the Allies. Or at least that's what I assume. Poland or Finland joining Comintern is undoubtedly responsible for the majority of resets during my attempts. A second operative enables us to conduct a collaboration government mission on the Soviets, since we've already built up the required network strength with our first operative in Vladivostok. The point of this operation is lowering the surrender limit of the Soviet Union by a couple of points. While marching through the United Kingdom, we make sure to only surround London, but never actually capture it. We nevertheless keep an eye on the city, since the AI frequently spawns new divisions here. Just be careful to not accidentally walk into London prematurely. Finland joining the Allies marks the last moment of RNG in this strategy. Unless we make mistakes, the outcome of everything we do moving forward is 100% under our control. Our war with the Allies is about to come to an end. After Finland, only Norway, Switzerland and Spain are left on our list for this part of the run. I guess it's now time to answer the question why and how all this is going to work. Well, prior to version 1.12, only nations that generated war score were actually taking part in the peace conference. Any nation that did not inflict casualties or suffered damage to their buildings and infrastructure were classified as untouched and could not be annexed during the peace conference. But this mechanic no longer exists. Any nation that is part of a faction is up for grabs once the major nations of the faction have surrendered. This seemingly simple change has vast consequences and makes large conquests a lot less tedious compared to most prior versions of the game. We're going to heavily lean into this to gobble up as many nations during a war as we can. As soon as the casus belli against Spain has been justified, we declare on Spain and Switzerland, begin a new justification against Tibet, and move our forces into London to end this war. We have to be quick about this after declaring on Spain. If the Allies get called into their civil war, the peace conference is going to be a mess. With by blood alone enabled, do not go for Switzerland during this war and instead justify on them at the very end of your world conquest. The peace conference proves all our theories to be correct. Every nation that has been in the Allies already or was forced into the faction is now present at the conference. We have an abundance of points to spend and can easily annex everything and still have plenty of points left. If you play with by blood alone, you could annex their fleets and press for war reparations on top of the territorial claims. The conference also shows that another game mechanic has been removed, the so-called 7-day rule, which said that any war had to last at least 7 days before a peace conference could fire. This also meant that we had to wait 7 days after the last declaration of war before we could end the conflict, otherwise the latest participant would not have been merged into the already ongoing war. Although our territorial gains look quite impressive at first sight, it's really the equipment that we captured that is going to propel us forward. We now share a long border with the Soviets and have to show up soon before they can advance. But right now we can't deploy additional divisions anywhere close, which is why we're going to release France as a puppet. We can then select, copy and adapt their division templates. We choose to do so with French cavalry and infantry. The motorized template is also quite good, but we're going to need the trucks we have for a different purpose. The infantry remains unchanged, but the cavalry is reduced to a single battalion to become my beloved spam template. We're going to recruit 60 spam and 60 infantry units. We don't do this to preserve our own manpower. We have plenty and other puppets to draw from. What we care about is the ability to deploy these divisions on French territory. We're also setting up a land lease of 2,000 convoys. The reduced autonomy from that land lease is going to allow us to annex France again to the autonomy system. It's going to take roughly 20 days before we can deploy the French divisions, so let's use the units we already have for now. Our 2 regular armies are going to cover the north and south, while our heavy infantry is going to take the center position. We delete our 2 motorized divisions to regain the trucks and be able to set our armies to fully motorized supply once they reach the front line. We're not going to cover the former Finnish border in the north. The AI will nevertheless have divisions pushing into Scandinavia, which results in less divisions facing us on the critical front line. Because of our early declaration on the Soviets as well as our presence in the east, the AI has sent a lot of divisions that way while the European border is practically unmanned. We want to exploit openings in the front line and prevent hostile divisions from gaining preparation and entrenchment bonuses. That's why we start pushing, cutting off the enemy at key locations, and crossing rivers as early as possible right after our divisions arrive. We've already covered the methodology of mass annexing nations, so I don't think it's needed to mention each and every justification going forward. I'll instead provide you with a short explanation on the order of justifications. Don't worry, it's pretty simple. We target all nations that have no way of interfering with the war in a significant way first, like Tibet, Nepal, Bhutan, Yemen, Oman, Liberia and Ireland. After that, we move on to nations that actually can have an impact on the war, but only very little. These are Xinjiang, Afghanistan, Denmark, Saudi Arabia, Iraq and Ethiopia if it still exists. The new French divisions are needed as reinforcements as soon as possible, so we deploy them at the absolute minimum. The longer we wait, the more Soviet divisions will entrench themselves at the front line. We split the spam divisions into 2 full armies and some leftovers. The 2 armies are going to take a trip across the Atlantic and man the former Canadian border with the United States. We use the French infantry to fill up our armies in the field and create 1.5 new armies with what remains. The front line is going to become crowded for a while, which makes motorized supply even more important. The 2,000 convoys we lend-leased to France have arrived some time ago already. We now need 300 political power to annex them via the autonomy system. It is really important to annex them around this time since their autonomy will rise dramatically once their divisions enter combat. After their autonomy has surpassed what we can reduce through Lend-Lease, it is going to be near impossible to annex them through the autonomy system during the war. Why does that matter? Good question. Short answer, just do it. You can find the long answer in the description of the video, but we have to annex them either way. It's not a real world conquest if there are still other nations around. Not even puppet nations. For whatever reason, fleets are not automatically deleted once a nation is wiped from the map, nor are all their divisions. Specifically, those divisions that were at sea at the point of surrender somehow keep existing in the void until their home country manifests again. I won't complain, especially about the French Navy, but it's weird nevertheless. The front line with the Soviets is already pretty saturated. The leftover divisions are therefore setting up camp in former Belgium. A few days after we annexed France, a move that granted us another sizable chunk of equipment and returned our convoys back into our stockpile, it's time to take a focus again. We needed to hold off with that until after the annexation of France in order to accumulate political power fast enough. Meanwhile, we're creating havoc amongst the Soviet forces. We constantly try to spot and exploit openings in the front line to eventually create encircled pockets of hostile divisions. Managing battle plans on rapidly changing front lines, especially with new pockets forming so frequently, is rather tedious but important. The battle plan AI does not really make smart choices when it comes to allocating divisions once the initial front line has fractured into multiple fronts. This can lead to situations in which the ratio of encircling to encircled divisions becomes a massive overkill that drains forces from the actual front line, hinders your progress, and allows for possible counteroffenses. The most challenging part about the conquest of the Soviets is definitely the terrain, especially early on. Do not mindlessly attack while suffering low supply. Instead, use your superior numbers to flank around and attack from the sides. It won't take long until after the first substantial encirclements that large parts of the front line are going to be devoid of Soviet divisions. No matter what setup of orders, settings and battle plans I've tried, none of them were as fast as manually moving divisions when it comes to capturing undefended territory quickly. We now move on to justify our nations that can cause problems for our current war with the Soviets. Mostly because we aren't guarding any of their borders, potentially allowing them to disrupt our supply flow between our capital and the front line, or to recapture Soviet victory points. These are Portugal, Iran, Turkey, nationalist Spain and Bulgaria. At the end of 1936, the majority of Soviet forces on this front have been encircled and destroyed. Especially the southern part of the front line is wide open, with very few hostile divisions around. Our collab government mission finishes at the end of December. Nationalist Spain is the only nation with a specific reason for being dragged into this war, by the way. If we do not annex them soon, Carlist Spain is going to rise up, increasing the amount of nations that we need to annex. The anarchist uprising happens earlier, which is why we went for Republican Spain first. Launching the naval invasion into Vladivostok with a handful of divisions that we recruited with the equipment from annexing France marks the beginning of the end of the war with the Soviets. While the invasion forces are crossing the ocean, let's quickly address how I spent my army experience. Instead of continuing the mass assault doctrine, I switched over to superior firepower, since the bonuses, especially the early ones, are just better for our infantry setup than what mass assault can give us. The Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere focus finishes around this time as well, triggering the formation of the Chinese United Front. We won't select any more focuses after that to instead bank as much political power as possible to be able to annex our puppets through the autonomy system. We're just days away from the Soviet surrender now. As soon as Vladivostok falls, the Soviet Union should lay down their arms. But because the Soviets hold so many victory points, it's sometimes hard to predict the exact moment of surrender. It's around this time that the war with Germany requires some attention. Not only do we need a war goal on them before the Soviets collapse, otherwise we won't be at war with a major nation anymore, ideally we also transfer a substantial amount of divisions over from the Soviet front line in advance. If we don't, there's going to be a time gap in between wars, which is precisely what's going to happen to me. Unfortunately, the war ends exactly on the same day as our war goal on Germany finishes, and we don't have enough divisions on their border yet. The peace conference doesn't come with any surprises. As expected, we can annex all opposing nations because they all joined Comintern, and none of them have yet risen up to the status of major. And although the possibility of nations rising up to be major nations hasn't been a threat so far, it is absolutely going to be one in our next war against Germany. I'm going to fast forward through the rest of the run from here on out. The principles remain the same and the big challenges are behind us already. The rest is just logistics and not messing up too badly. Right after the peace conference, I contemplated whether or not to restart once more, but decided to go for it knowing that I should still have a bit of extra time left. So let's get to work. We already have a small army in former Belgium and now use our other armies from the Soviet offensive to encapsulate Germany. I usually place the heavy infantry around the Czech-Polish-German bulge and only sparsely cover the front to the west. The main push is going to come from the east, simply because it would take a couple of days on top to relocate divisions to the other side of Germany. We then use the captured equipment to once more recruit additional divisions for our upcoming war with China. This is only going to be the first batch. Another one will follow once Germany has fallen. Since our last justification finished on the same day as the peace conference, we need to declare on Germany ASAP to be able to continue to rapidly justify more war goals. We could do that immediately, but I wanted to exploit how the borders are currently shaped. The bad timing here results in a time loss of 15 days, and it's not going to be my last mistake. After our units are in position, we declare war and continue justifying. Next in line are Greece, Austria, Luxembourg, the Baltic states, and Siam. This puts us on a timer, since we now have to start justifications in Central and South America, simply because there are no other targets available anymore. But as soon as we declare, the US is going to get involved because of their guarantees on all American nations, and we aren't quite ready for that. Meanwhile, we use our newly recruited divisions back home to encircle the Chinese United Front from all sides. Because of bad logistics and terrain, you can pretty much ignore the northern borders. We nevertheless position an army of cavalry divisions to force the AI to match our numbers on the front line. Our infantry divisions are going to move into the former Portuguese and British port colonies, as well as to the land borders with Yunnan to the south and China to the west. We aim to reduce the divisions needed to keep Germany in check by taking the majority of the country, while still making sure that they do not surrender just yet. If we had a more even distribution of divisions, we could also attack from the west, but our divisions in former Belgium are rather crap and not strong in numbers, and pushing across the Rhine into mountainous terrain isn't particularly effective either. It took me until May of 1937 to push the German forces back to a point that I felt confident enough to finalize the preparations of the invasion of the Americas. The reduced strength of Germany and shorter front lines allow us to relocate about an army and a half to Canada and the Bahamas. The purpose of the army in the north is to simply keep the US divisions that are currently stationed there from redeploying. The Bahamas are going to be the staging ground for naval invasions into South Carolina, supported by the annexed French Navy. Germany has to stay alive until we've justified and declared our final war goals for this part of the run and moved our divisions against the US in position. So far, we're either at war with or have war goals against all non-American and non-Chinese nations, but we have to prolong the current war for a little while longer in order to prevent one of the last remaining hurdles that have the potential to end the run. It's important that we include Brazil, Mexico and Argentina, otherwise there's a chance that they are going to become major nations between the end of this war and the next. In all prior versions of the game, minor nations becoming major nations sometimes along the way was a huge pain. It was simply unavoidable due to the rules of major and minor nations. These rules dictated that a nation rises up to the status of major once it is in the top 7 nations in factory count, or by having 70% of the amount of factories that the top 7 nations control on average. The only other way to become a major nation was, and is, to be the leader of a faction. The current version of the game, version 1.12, again introduced a small but significant change to this formula. Now there's a minimum factory count present on top of the previously mentioned requirements, meaning a nation now needs to have at least 35 factories and fulfill the old conditions before it rises up in status. That's great for us, since most remaining nations at this point aren't even remotely close to owning 35 factories, except Brazil, Mexico and Argentina. The fact that I don't declare on Cuba as well here is going to come back and bite me soon. Because of their guarantee on all American nations, the US has now entered the war and the Philippines alongside them. Time to deal the final blow to Germany. We've created a situation in advance that allows us to now just walk into some of the remaining high-value victory points pretty much unchallenged. The war against the Axis ends a couple of days later. The 4th peace conference of this campaign yields us the remaining territory outside the Americas, except the CUF of course, as well as large chunks of Central and South America. We again captured plenty of equipment from enemy stockpiles and we'll get some more now that we no longer need the divisions in Europe. Instead of redeploying them, which takes forever, we rather delete them and recruit them again afterwards. A single army remains and is going to reinforce the front line in the US once the naval invasion has made landfall. The additional equipment from captured stockpiles and deleted divisions are again used to recruit even more divisions back home, but heavy infantry this time. And let's not forget about Japan's puppets. We have over 300 political power in the bank and only need to lower the autonomy of a puppet in order to annex them. Manchukuo served as well as a buffer zone and cost-free division magnet for the Soviets, but it's time for full assimilation now. Over in the Americas, we're in a situation that I wasn't sure how it would play out. We aren't at war with a faction anymore, but keep declaring on South American nations. Would the US now create a new faction with them? I absolutely assumed so, since the US has the ability to form new factions from the start, given world tension is high enough. Curiously enough though, they don't do that. Instead, they'll all join the Chinese United Front once we go to war with them too. Little tip here for naval invasions, by the way: if you're facing naval invasion capacity limits but still want to land lots of divisions quickly, there are plenty of ways to have additional divisions loiter around in the adjacent sea zone to reinforce once our divisions made landfall. But overall, our conquest of the United States doesn't need much strategic explanation. They are still stuck in the Great Depression and isolationism, and therefore have only fielded very few divisions in total. We push along the coast to create a wide front line and to cut off the US forces in the north. As soon as their connection back to the capital is severed, the other divisions at the Canadian border here will begin moving east. After they've abandoned this front, our spam divisions can simply rush down the west coast. In terms of justifications, we keep going through South and Central America. It's China's turn as soon as our most recent batch of fresh divisions have been deployed and sent out to different ports in close proximity to the last remaining faction. The idea here is for each army of 20 heavy infantry to land with 10 divisions, to take a port, and then be reinforced by the other 10 units that stayed behind. You'll see that in action in a minute. First, we need to recruit some more divisions. You've probably been wondering about resistance already sometime during this video, and rightfully so. The world is pretty much a burning wasteland at this point, with little to no working factories and infrastructure. Those nations that fell early during our conquests are now coming closer and closer to the dangerous threshold of 90% resistance, at which a nation can rise up in rebellion. We mitigate that by paying close attention to the garrison window, with nations sorted by resistance and manually setting nations to martial law if they get close to 85%. It's not ideal, but it's going to carry us through the last couple of weeks of our campaign. At the end of August, we're ready and begin our justification on China. It's also here that I make another avoidable mistake. Remember the war goal on Cuba? Well, yeah, that just expired. So on top of the 15 days lost from my logistics blunder in Europe, I now have to do the justification against Cuba again, meaning I've wasted 25 days so far. After declaring war on China, I correct my mistake and justify on Cuba again, and also go to war with everyone that we have justified on in the past 2 months. All these nations, as well as everyone we're already at war with, are going to join the CUF except the United States. This means we've reached the endgame. The main objectives now are to end the war with the US and to quickly overwhelm nationalist China, all while justifying and declaring on the remaining nations. Our first wave of naval invasions left port right after the war began. We delete the orders while the invasion is still ongoing and start drawing up naval invasion plans for another 10 divisions, again with only a single division per order. The United States are surrendering during the short planning phase for the second invasion wave. They never joined a faction and therefore get a separate conference. Now only the Chinese United Front is left, with nationalist China as the last major nation in the game. After the peace conference is over, we delete most of the armies in North America. We need all the equipment that we can get for supplying both garrison divisions and ground forces. Our next naval invasion has left port, so we delete their orders as well and plan the third invasion wave. The obvious tactic is to not only come from all angles on land, but to pierce right into Chinese core territory from the coast as well. The many rivers, mountain ranges, poor infrastructure and bad supply situation usually prohibits fast advances. By attacking from all sides, we make sure that we are going to be able to get to all relevant victory points, which are unfortunately scattered around the whole country, in time before the end of the year. It's September 1937, so we have a little less than 4 months left to achieve our goal. Our third invasion is followed up by a fourth, again right after the divisions have left port towards their destination. This last wave is going to close the gap towards our infantry armies to the south. The airports in China are far and few in between, but it might be sensible to use paratroopers here, even if only as a failsafe. I'll probably do that next time. I aim to reduce the overall time to 3 hours and maybe achieve a better final IGT date as well in my next attempt. The run we're using as a demonstration here is not a valid submission for the speedrun.com leaderboards, since I had to play it in 2 parts and only uninterrupted recordings are allowed. I've sent the Lend-Lease to the last Japanese puppet a bit late, so it only arrives mid-November. We had the needed amount of political power a couple of weeks ago already, but it doesn't matter. It's still within our time limit. The other Japanese puppet was annexed back in July. China has been pushed back significantly by the time December comes around, but the time is ticking and the last advance can take longer than one might expect due to the aforementioned challenges. On December 12th we declare on our backlog of war goals again and begin justifying against Venezuela. It's the last one. 10 days later, on December 22nd, the casus belli finishes. We declare immediately and check one last time to make sure that all nations have joined the Chinese United Front, since it sometimes takes them a day or two to actually do so. It's nevertheless going to take a couple of days more to push on to the final victory point. On December 28th, the war finally comes to an end and I'm relieved and happy to achieve a sub-38 world conquest for the first time and to have a somewhat coherent recording of it. In the end, I lost exactly 30 days to the optimal time, which means that a final date in September 37 is absolutely possible for Japan. Maybe I can achieve that in my recording for the speedrun.com submission. I hope I didn't bore you with all the talk about decision making and reasons for this and that, but I just had to get all the thoughts about this out of my head. They've been brewing there for far too long. I appreciate every single one of you for making it this far into the video. It's your comments, feedbacks and likes that motivate me to make more content. Thank you so much for watching, stay safe and have a great day.